Hi, I'm Mary Beth Stapleton, Manager of Family and Community Partnerships for Harford County Public Schools. Welcome to our Parent Academy virtual Real Talk on Lead with Love, a campaign focused on how do we talk with our children and how do we lead our communities with love and kindness. With me today is Dr. Paula Stanton, who's our Manager of Equity and Cultural Proficiency for Harford County Public Schools. Hello, Dr. Stanton.
Hello, how are you? Great to
It's
be here.
good to have you today. Thanks for joining me today.
My
Um,
pleasure.
Absolutely. To get us started, we're going to ask Dr. Stanton to introduce herself and to give her background and expertise in the area of equity and cultural proficiency.
Hi, it's always interesting to hear people say, give my
I know.
expertise. I'm learning just like we all are learning. So I really want to make sure that message is out there. But again, I'm Dr. Paula Stanton. I'm the Manager of Equity and Cultural Proficiency for Harford County Public Schools. And that's a really long title. So I'll try to make it plain. I feel like my job is to make sure that we are fully aware in Harford County of our policy around equity and that we help our communities and our schools and our students to know that we want to make sure that there's equitable opportunities or there are equitable opportunities for all of our students. So when we look at things like bullying and harassment, we look at disproportionate discipline, we make sure that every single resource that we provide to our students is good for all of our students and is available to all of our students. So in a nutshell, that's pretty much my responsibility.
And that's a lot of work. So that's supporting teachers and training for them as well on in the
Yes.
classroom and school-based administrators too, right?
That's right. And I
Yeah.
also serve as the liaison between the district and the state. And so I meet with state representatives of other school districts, and we talk about ways that we can improve equity for all across the state of Maryland.
That's great work. Well, thank you for being here and for helping us with this right now, because right now our country is struggling with protests across the country. Many of them are peaceful, which is good to see our democracy in action. But
Yeah.
as parents, and we see this on the news, and we know our children are seeing it, perhaps in social media and such. We want to develop the confidence to talk with our children about race, about race relations, and the current situation. But to be honest, many of us are just really unsure how to have that conversation. Sometimes we may feel that if we don't talk about it, that might be the best way to approach it.
Yes.
But I have a feeling you might say there's a different way than just trying to kind of brush it under the rug and not talk about it with our children.
That's right. And I think agreeing to talk about it is the first step, because I know that people are uncomfortable with conversations about race. And so I guess my first advice to people who would say, but I don't really want to talk about it with my kids because I don't want them to see color. My response to them is our race and our ethnicity is part of who we are. And it's important that we begin to celebrate that as early as possible. And in order to celebrate that, we have to talk about it. So I know in situations, I've been guilty of it myself, where my granddaughter has said, oh my gosh, why is her skin so light, or why is her skin so dark? And I've sort of shushed her away because I didn't want to have the race conversation in front of other people. But those are missed opportunities, I feel, to say all of our skin tones are beautiful. It's so important that we have a rich rainbow of skin tones. And so, I would approach that differently the next time she asked me, or even I might bring it up to her again on my own.
Right. And I think that's something that is probably the first impulse or response is to push it away. And I think, to your point, try to embrace the moment, make it teachable. That's great advice. And I'm sure I haven't always, with my 4 children, taken that on. So I think I want to try that too. So when we're talking about it then, and we're talking about race, what are some strategies we can use to have a conversation?
So I know there's been a lot of conversation around, when should we start to talk about it and what are the strategies? And so as I've been reading lots of material around what to do, I came across an article, and actually it's sort of a website. It's the Parent Toolkit parenttoolkit.org. And in that parent toolkit, they suggest 6 things that we can do to talk about race. And one of those things is, first, as we said before, to actually talk about it. Sesame Street, for example, has these have done these productions where they've helped us to approach the conversation with younger kids. They also suggest that we set the example in our behavior, in our speech, exposing students to conversations and interactions with people who are different from us. They suggest that we navigate their curiosity. So when they ask questions like my granddaughter asked, to really ask them what are they, or try to figure out what they're really asking us. Because sometimes they're just noticing differences and not really asking us about race, but that might be a way into the conversation. And then the next thing is make it relatable. Sometimes we have to tell our students stories that make them understand why something is the way it is, or how we can be inclusive of everyone. Address mistakes. So when we make a mistake, or when our kids make a mistake, we have to address those right away. And then finally, be an advocate. So it's so important that we all advocate for human rights and for rights related to racial conversations. Human rights, civil rights, all of those things are important, and we need to show that they're important through our actions and our conversations.
Wow, those are great tools. And we have, we'll definitely have that website and that link up for parents to go back and really go a little bit deeper into that information, because it's a lot of great information for parents to have. And just to get a little bit more sensitive about that and talking about those strategies a bit, you know, as a white parent, you know, and many circles with white moms and dads and guardians, feeling comfortable about having that conversation about race without feeling guilty or saying the wrong thing. We're just so hesitant sometimes because we're just not quite sure what to say, and we don't want to offend. So, you know, you and I have talked about this, and I think you had some great ideas, and I would love for you to share them with our parents.
Yeah, I think one of the main things that I advocate for is doing our research and allowing or supporting our students in doing some of that work with us. I feel like sometimes I've heard from people that they're hesitant to talk about it because they feel like they're uncomfortable because they're white and they don't want to offend people or say the wrong thing. First, you know, one of the things I mentioned earlier was when you say the wrong thing, it's okay to own that. It's okay to say, you know what, I didn't say that correctly. Thanks for helping me learn to do better.
Well, and just to interrupt you for a second, I think parents say the wrong thing a lot. And I think having that just, you know, grace to say to your children, look, I make mistakes too, it's okay, is probably a good way to go anyway with all issues, right?
That's right. That's right. We don't have to be the experts about everything. And if we don't know something, it's important to tell our kids, hey, I'm not sure. Let's look that up together and let's figure it out together. So I feel like the more opportunities we have to expand our knowledge about other people, to even expand our knowledge about racism and discrimination in the United States and abroad is important, because I think many of our students can have a short-sighted view of how things have come to be. And what I've heard them say is, you know, after responding to a situation, I've heard them say, I didn't know that, or this is the first I've heard of that. And so that education piece is so important as we approach these topics.
That's very helpful. So when we're thinking about that, and we're seeing these conversations and we're trying to lead with love and have kindness and compassion, we're still seeing, our children are still seeing anger around them at times. And, you know, how do we help them understand that anger and really try to talk about it with them, rather than, again, turning it off, ignoring it, and really thinking that they don't see it when we know that they do?
Yeah, I think that kind of aligns with kind of what I was saying earlier. We need to ask questions. We need to ask them, why do you think they're angry? And that might spark a conversation around, maybe I'm not so sure why they're angry. Let's figure it out. When I hear a lot of the media reports around what's happening in the world today, and I hear some of them say, there's so much violence out there, I think in some people's minds that takes away from the reasoning behind it. And of course, we don't advocate violence, but we also need to understand what's behind all of that so that we don't repeat that behavior in the future. And I think it's so important that our students are allowed to do that, explore the anger and see the other person's perspective, because what they might hear us say as adults is they shouldn't be doing that, or I don't know why they're doing that. And they sort of take on the mentality and philosophy and beliefs of people who are older than them. And I want to challenge parents out there everywhere, and I'm a parent myself, as I said, I'm a grandparent, to not visit all of our beliefs upon our students, our children, but to encourage them to form their own opinions with some sound research and some sound looking back at what has happened in the past. The history of protests is a good way to start, a place to start. The history of civil rights, all kinds of civil rights, is a good place to start. We've got to really get into our history and really understand it so that we really understand the anger.
Well, thinking about that and thinking about the history, I do know that we have in our curriculum, ensuring that history is taught. And so I've seen in my own daughters and my own children's curriculum and lessons, there's definitely a lot of referral information about it. So probably being aware first and foremost about what our children are learning in the classroom, and then having those conversations with them might be a good way to go as well.
Mm-hmm. And curriculum is evolving. A curriculum is never finished. And that's one of the beautiful things about education, is that just because you haven't learned something in the past doesn't mean we can't continue to mold those experiences for our students. And I think in Harford County, we do a good job of really reflecting on what our curriculum is teaching, where it's fallen short, and then how can we continue to elevate what our students have learned. There have been some great projects happening this year in particular, before any of the protesting and demonstrations started to happen, around what our students learn in elementary school that prepares them for these kinds of conversations. So I want people out there to know that we are constantly evaluating our curriculum, and we honor the feedback of you, parents. When you say, this is something that my kids are learning about, and I'm not sure how you're approaching it, we want to be able to answer those questions, but we also want to be able to take your views into consideration. And so I think folks can look out for more ways to be a part of the conversations around curriculum, around discipline, and all of these other topics that we're tackling.
Oh, that's great. And that's part of that kind of lead with love.
That's right. That's how we do it.
Message. Absolutely. Well, thinking about that concept of curriculum and understanding what's being taught, we also need to teach our children more so that we're really not, America really isn't a melting pot
Yes.
so much, but I've heard that, accept, address, celebrate our differences rather than just, we're all kind of lumped into the melting pot. Any thoughts around that? And I'm sure, like I said, I think our curriculum talks about that too.
Yeah. I don't know where I heard it, but I heard someone refer to it as a salad bowl instead. And so you think about a salad bowl, you think about all of those wonderful ingredients, some crunchy, some sweet, some sour, and how they all kind of make that salad great, including the dressing. That's my favorite part of the salad, the dressing. But, and we have, even when in a melting pot, everything kind of gets mixed and assimilated together. But when we have that salad bowl, we can still celebrate the individual identities of all parts of that salad. So I think that's a better way to think about it, because I can still feel the crunch of the carrots, even when the salad is all meshed in there together. So I think it's important that we look at individual differences as relevant, and that we celebrate them and honor them.
That's wonderful. That's really a great image. So thinking about that, the differences that we have as a country, that's who we are. How do we, again, looking at the curriculum, how do we teach our students that racism isn't just an African American problem in our country, that, many different cultures struggle with this?
Yeah, I think the first thing we need to do is be clear about the definition of racism, because when you look up the definition of racism, it's about preferring and having actions that show that one race is superior to another. It doesn't mention black, white, or whatever, And so that's why it's important that we are anti-racist, that we talk to our kids about how we are all important, how no one is superior and no one is inferior. Those are the messages that we have to start to send. And it's not just about saying that we don't want anyone to feel as if they don't belong. It's more about really promoting the ways that we do all belong. And I think it's sort of similar, but it's different. And I think traditionally curriculum has not been anti-racist, but moving forward, it needs to be. And so, that's probably a larger conversation, but that's just my thinking.
Yeah, but I think that parents can help with that again by things that we watch together, maybe books that we suggest our children read, just to kind of show that there's all kinds of differences. And to your point, that salad bowl, which is I love that image. So thinking about that, so when students see, explore, maybe, want to learn more, what are some actions that they can take, in their community, in their home, in their school? To be honest, there are some parts of our county, in Hartford County, that aren't diverse still. And so, they may come up against it and be surprised if they see the racism and such. So any thoughts around that, about how they can express, a positive message when racism comes up?
Yeah, I think, so I may have said this before, but one of the things I go back to is, how are we teaching our students to seek relationships and opportunities to hear the perspectives of people who are different? Like, do we, even if I don't go to a school that is particularly racially diverse, are there opportunities for me to talk to people who are racially diverse, and how do I seek those out? I think we're going to try to do some of that for students by creating these groups that sort of cross over to different schools. I'll give you an example. Hartford Tech High School and Bel Air High School both have a group called Voices of Equity. And this was something that came out of conversations that we started having earlier this year. And they sort of came up with those titles together, and we hope that will start to happen all over the school system. But they're going to be looking at equity matters related to race, related to gender, related to gender identity. And so joining those types of groups can be one way that they can start to get involved. Also, I had a group ask, what can we do? We're students, but what can we do? And we kind of brainstormed some ideas, like writing to your senators and your politicians and your policymakers to tell them how you are feeling and what some of the solutions that you've come up with might be. I think that's a good step. And I think there are some ways to be socially active in our community. For example, when you see something happening, have we figured out a way to help you speak up? And if you don't feel comfortable speaking up, at the very least, tell someone so that they can help you to speak up and to really be allies in the fight for social justice. So, I know that doesn't necessarily speak to the younger kids, but we can teach them when they're very young to say, when you see someone being excluded because of their hair or because of the shoes they're wearing or because of the color of their skin, I'm going to teach you how to invite them in rather than push them out. So we've got to figure out developmentally appropriate ways to help our students be active. And I think we're doing that.
That's wonderful work. Really good work. And I think, to your point, that relationships are everything. So I know many of our students have opportunities to participate in sports and drama productions and such, before we had the COVID closure. Hopefully we'll get back to all that next year at some point. But I think those relationship building experiences, side by side with somebody on a team, really is a great divide, just breaking the divide for sure. That's great. So thinking about that and taking it a step further as the parents and the adults in the conversation, what can we do to move from, lots of talk, there's a lot of talk, a lot of ideas about what we can do. Of course, we see the protests, but any other ideas about how do we move to action to change our world, quite frankly?
Wow, that's a big one. I don't know.
That's heavy. Sorry about that.
No, that's okay. I think first we have to figure out what our goals are. Is our goal that every single student goes to school and feels supported and welcome and valued and affirmed and honored? And if that's the case, then we sort of map that back to what are our actions to make sure that happens. And so some of the things that we don't do is we don't run away when there is a situation. You know, we stay and we figure out how to make that work. And I think we keep our lines of communication with our children and our students open so that we hear some of the issues that they're facing, and that I think it's important that we work side by side with them. Sometimes we feel like we're working, you know, there's the school system, and then there is the community, and then there's, you know, some other groups that are stakeholders. But I think the more opportunities we have to all be at the same table, or to have representatives at the same table, that's how we answer that question. I don't have the exact answer right now, and I think it's okay that we don't. But I think the conversation needs to get started. It needs to continue to happen, and we need lots of voices and perspectives at the table.
Well, and I think to your point, you know, you did say something that is definitely a solution, which is don't just sit back and do nothing, right? I mean, we need to be active. I also do think that we adults sometimes will post something on Facebook or share something on Facebook and think that's it, we're done. But I think that, in my view, and this is just my opinion, that perhaps, you know, taking it a step further, to your point, if you're concerned about something, reach out to your representatives, reach out to your congressman, your senator, you know, make your voice heard in additional ways than just perhaps posting on social media. But then also talking with your family about what you can do together. Sounds like what you've shared, which is really a great idea. So thinking about that, you know, administration, teachers responding to parents, students demanding an equal challenge, you know, demanding quote unquote equal education. We've heard those kinds of things. So what are we doing? I mean, you started to talk a little bit about this, and of course we work every day, all day, to your point, towards equity. It's what your office does. But just to kind of help parents understand, how are we responding? How are we basically working with our teachers and administrators to make sure that equity lens is used in all cases?
I think we're doing so much work. I'll mention a few things that I know we're doing. So every new employee to Harford County Public Schools either participates in a cultural proficiency workshop or takes an entire course where we talk about a variety of topics that address diversity, poverty, and all of the populations or small populations that we might see in the world, because really we're preparing our students and our teachers and everyone. We want to be able to navigate and do well and succeed in a diverse global curriculum, in a diverse global society. So we're doing that, but we also, we're looking at our data regularly. For example, we know that across the nation, there's a problem with disproportionate discipline of students of color and students with disabilities. And so as a district, we look at that data monthly, and we're looking at strategies that we can use to be more culturally proficient with our discipline so that we don't see an imbalance there. That's something that we have been doing. That's a mandate by the state. And so that's something that will continue on a regular basis. We also have an equity team that looks at every policy and practice and procedure, especially recently with the closing of school, with that equity lens. And what that means is that we're really focused on how do we make sure that what we're doing is the right thing for students who have been marginalized in the past, who have been underrepresented, who've been underserved, where there are gaps in opportunity and gaps in achievement. And we're looking at that at the front end rather than at the back end. And so I think that's important work that has to continue. We want it to be such that every single person is always thinking about what's best for all of our students. Those are three things that we're doing, but this Lead with Love campaign is probably our most recent way of really engaging with the community and saying, we know that in the past, there may have been things that we haven't gotten right. But what we are committed to doing now is saying we're standing up against those things and allow us to do better, allow us to be better, work with us, walk with us, and help us get there.
Well, that's a pretty powerful way to end this conversation, Dr. Stanton, and that's for sure. Leading with love. That's awesome. Thank you so much for your time and
Thank
for
you.
sharing these strategies and tips for parents. And we'll definitely put those resources up for parents to see as well, so that they can do a deeper dive into this information. And also, just knowing that you're there at the helm of the equity office and trying to oversee this work in a very intentional way. So thank you for that. And thank you for joining us for the Parent Academy Virtual Real Talk on Lead with Love. And we hope to see you next time. Stay well.